everybody back here tonight, and I thank Jeremy for leading those songs. I was disappointed. I was hoping for the to find as many songs about little girls as he could in the songbook, but nothing to go along exactly with the theme. No, but did a great job leading those songs, and we are talking about a little girl's great faith. And you'll notice we're in 2 Kings chapter 5, if you want to go ahead and turn there and look at this particular story. I think one that is familiar to all of us. We're talking about the story of Naaman. We'll go ahead and read those 5 verses and see if we can figure out where she comes into play. 2 Kings chapter 5, looking at verse number 1. Now Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great and honorable man in the eyes of his master, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was also a mighty man of valor, but a leper. And the Syrians had gone out on raids and had brought back captive a young girl from the land of Israel. She waited on Naaman's wife. Then she said to her mistress, "If only my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria, for he would heal him of his leprosy." And Naaman went in and told his master, saying, "Thus and thus said the girl who is from the land of Israel." Then the king of Syria said, "Go now, and I will send the letter to the king of Israel." So he departed, and took with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, 10 changes of clothing. We, of course, know the rest of that particular story. The story of the healing of the leprosy takes up all of 2 Kings chapter 5. Normally, the main characters, of course, are Elijah. He's the man of God, the prophet of God, that gives Naaman his instructions, of course, and then Naaman, he's definitely the main character, the one that's getting healed. Of course, Gehazi makes we'll put him in honorable or dishonorable mention as he passes along the message to Naaman of how to be healed, and also shows him at the end of the story and takes over the leprosy for Naaman. Those are normally the main characters. Out of the 27 verses in chapter 5, this little girl is mentioned, just talked about, described in 2 verses. She actually gets a speaking part, all one verse out of those 27 verses out of chapter 5. And we understand the rest of the story. Again, he's reluctant to obey and eventually does. But what I want to do is look at the beginning of this particular story and those words that she said, and look at this little girl and her faith, and see what kind of lessons that we can learn from this captive. Looking at her situation, she is described as a young girl. The King James Version says a little maid, and basically this time frame, basically from an infant up to teenager, as far as a little maid, a young girl. And so we're talking maybe teenage girl, could be younger. We don't know. We start looking at Google as being the authority. Wink, wink. At all the images of the story as you go on. There's some that have her 5 years old or less. There's some that have her up into the teenage years. Of course, we don't know exactly how old she was. We just know she was not an older lady or adult. This is someone who was considered a young girl. But she was a slave. Here she was from Israel. She had been captured in Syrian raids and brought back. And so we look at her situation. She's definitely away from home. She's been taken to a foreign country. And don't know her situation. Well, was she away from everyone? Had she been taken away from her parents, her family? Did she know anybody else there? We don't know anything about that. But she was not where she was born. She was not home. It was not the perfect situation. She was property of some Syrians. Looking at this little girl, though, just from the words that she says and the job that she has and maybe what's not said about her. We see that instead of being hateful and resentful and not doing anything at all, she was actually working. She actually cared for Naaman's wife. She was her servant girl. And she cared about her master. She cared about Naaman and the fact that he had leprosy. And instead of just the property of this family, I'm just a slave. So instead of saying I'm so glad he's not hanging out with that prophet of God so that he could be healed, she was wishing that he could be there with him so that he could be healed. It looks like she was trying to make the best out of a bad situation. Reminded me of Joseph. We see, of course, as he is has that loving family of his that gave him an all-expense-paid trip out of town. He was also a slave and under control of someone else's home. And yet, when he got there, he worked. God blessed him. And he was able to rise up in ranks and then even being cast into prison. When he got there, he worked and been able to rise up in responsibilities and was able to gain access to having the ability to share what he knew. And so here she is, the same thing. Looks like she is there in captivity, but is working. And the relationship that we see with Naaman's wife, it must have been a friendly conversation, to be able to, or a friendly relationship, open, cordial. She just was, what was on her mind came out of her mouth, and was able to share this news that he could be healed if he was here, if he was with this prophet of God. And so we see this little girl's faith. She must have been religious, zealous about God, knowing who God was, knowing who God's people were, and in particular this prophet called Elisha and what he was able to do, which is interesting because she's from the northern kingdom, and they were not the most well-known God-fearing people. They were more of the God-fearing people. A lot of them worshiped idols. That started early on as soon as the northern kingdom was created. Jeroboam, of course, put the golden calves there in Dan and Bethel, and encouraging those there in the northern kingdom, worship here. Don't go all the way down to Jerusalem. Worship here, and that way you could stay here in your own country. He was afraid they'd travel down to Jerusalem and forget the way back. And so over and over again, of course, every king that was there was evil. And idolatry was rampant. But she knew who Elisha was. She knew that he was the prophet of God, and that not only was he a good person, she knew Elisha could heal him. It's not, well, if he could just meet up with Elisha, if he was just there, he might be able to heal him. No. She went ahead and called it on out like it was. She knew he would be healed if he was just there with Elisha. Reminds me of Paul, and he talked with Timothy about what he did. 2 Timothy 1, verse 12, for which cause I also suffer these things. Nevertheless, I am not ashamed, for I know whom I have believed, and am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I have committed unto him against that day. We know what Paul went through. He suffered a lot, and yet he had a reason to. He knew what God was able to do. He knew what God had promised if he remained faithful to him and served him. Heaven was waiting. And so it was not, no chance to waver there because he was serving the God who was going to keep his promises. We see that again in Nehemiah chapter 1 and chapter 9. We've looked at the book of Nehemiah in the Wednesday night adult class. And a couple times Nehemiah prayed to God in those 2 chapters, and praying to the great and awesome God. But he also threw this part in on the prayers, who keeps his covenants. He was praying to God who kept his promises. He wasn't going to lie. If he promised something, Nehemiah said, I know you're going to keep your word. We see in Psalm 105, verse 8, he remembers his covenant forever, the word which he commanded for 1,000 generations. I have a hard time remembering things. Missy says, go to the store. All right, so it's 3 things, right? If I can get to 3 things, I can say that over and over again. If you add the 4th thing, the list is coming out. We serve an awesome God who has not only given us his promise and promises, the word which he commanded, he remembers for 1,000 generations. That's not even 1,000 years. That's much longer than that. We serve a God who's going to remember his promises and remember to keep them. And this is what this little girl seemed to remember. That this God who she served, and through, of course, who Elisha served, would be powerful enough to heal. We see the same thing, Psalm 111, verse 5, he has given food to those who fear him. He will ever be mindful of his covenant. He's not going to forget. He's going to keep his promises. All right, so what about, a lot of people say, listen, I want to do this, but I got to make sure people are around. There's a paparazzi close by, because when I do this, I want everybody to get a shot of me doing this. So, fame, fortune, eventually she's going to get a book deal, and probably, be able to pick out who's going to play her in the movie. Looking for, instant fame. Of course, with this little girl, no name in lights, no special holiday to remember her by. We don't even know what her name is. Little girl. That's all we know. Young maiden. The little Israelite slave girl. Naaman's slave. I mean, these are not, these names that we're not going to name our kids any of those things. She wasn't doing this just for fame and fortune, and pat me on the back because I'm giving you this information. She didn't even come back up. We read about Naaman, and he's going over there. He gets in the water eventually, and he is, he's a believer in God. There's no telling what he had tried up to that point to get rid of leprosy. And you're telling me all you got to do is go dip in the Jordan River 7 times and it's clean, and I got baby skin after that. I believe in God. And he went back to proclaiming that. But she doesn't come back up. The one that told him about that. She wasn't in it for the glory or the attention. Here's the thing, she just knew a fact, and it came out of her mouth. Elisha could heal her. Sometimes we know people. The way people are, the way people act. Sometimes it's those quiet, righteous, faithful people just talking about what they know. That could lead someone to the source of healing. Healing something that's way, way worse than this death sentence that Naaman had with leprosy. Just by speaking what we know could lead somebody to be able to obey the gospel and be cured from sin, something that will cause us to be lost forever. So when we look at this little girl, what kind of lessons can we learn from her faith? We see, of course, through the Bible, we have different examples of powerful females. Some strong female leaders and strong in these incredible stories that we see. Deborah, of course, she was one of the judges, and she was helping lead the army. She encouraged Barak to lead the forces. He wouldn't go unless she was going with him. And we see Ruth, who was so supportive of her mother-in-law and just loved her so much and had enough faith in her and then her God that she was able to leave her family and be able to go with her back with Naomi to her land. We see Esther, of course, who risked her own life multiple times to be able to go in and stand up for her people, to stand up for herself. But going before the king, of course, the one time she didn't wait to be called, even though she was supposed to. Still went before him at the risk of her life to be able to save lives. And we see this great faith in these great stories, and there's a lot written about. Deborah gets a whole chapter. Ruth and Esther, they got their own books. And the little girl gets about 3 verses. One, she gets to speak. So this is influence from somebody that's not this great hero of the Bible, even though she's a great hero of the Bible. She didn't let her youth, her age, anything get in the way of doing what she needed to do, saying what she needed to say. We see those that are the young folks, we talk to them about these stories, and not just because, hey, kids, these are the Bible stories that we grew up with, in Bible class and vacation Bible school, and we are really twisting arms and, popping them on the back of the head, pay attention. This is a story you can really, you can do this too. You don't have to go kill a giant, but you can have faith enough to be able to stand up to a giant. You can have faith in God to be able to stand up to the world, because the world is all over the place. It's living in your school. It's living in that box that you watch that has a little remote control that goes with it. It's living in the little thing that has the speakers that you listen to in the car, or with the headphones. The world is everywhere. Are you, as young people, being able to have strong enough faith to stand up to that? This little girl had enough faith in God to be able to just say, he could be healed. The pressures of youth, we talk about it from time to time. Missy and I were actually talking about it on the way here. It was rough when we were growing up, just a few years ago. Okay, thank you. But the pressures now, there's a lot of things that aren't, not even thought of when we were growing up, as far as opportunities to sin. The pressure is there. It's real. But the fact remains the same. God's requirements are also the same. He wants us to be faithful. The opportunity to sin has been around since, we see it first pop up in Genesis chapter 3. That's been a few years ago. No, I was not around then. But that's, 6,000 years ago. The opportunity to sin was there. And it has been there ever since. Maybe the method is different. But God's requirement for us to be able to stand up to that has always been the same. No matter the situation. Stand up. Be faithful. This young girl is a tremendous example. Again, we don't know her situation. We know she was a piece of property to Naaman and his wife. Whether they bought her, took her, they had possession of her. And she spoke what needed to be said about what she knew being the power of God in this prophet Elisha. we look at the things that we can do, service to others, being godly behavior. Matthew chapter 25, this is when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him. He will separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats, and he will set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, "Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." So here we have this great scene. This is demonstrated, and he is fixing. This is it's about time to open up the gates and y'all come on in. I have prepared this place for you because of what you've done in life on earth. And then he mentions what they've done. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. These people were taking care of others. Because he says, when they ask, when did we see you in this situation and help you? Verse number 40, the king will answer and say to them, "Assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it to me." In his welcome to heaven speech, this is what you've done. You did the right thing. You helped someone in need. And so in turn, it's like you were helping me. Again, we look at the situation this little girl was in. This was someone who owned her. And instead of hating on him, the fact that she was not at home, not with her parents, not in her room, not back surrounded by all her friends. She was taken out of her country and hauled away to be a slave. And instead of hating on her master, she wanted the best for him. What about us? See, as far as I know, we're probably not going to be taken away captive into a foreign land. I don't think the Canadians are going to come down here and drag us back up. I think we're safe from that. Do we want the best for everyone? To the point of whether it's helping feed, provide a place to stay, visits, sharing the knowledge of how to save your soul from hell. Do we have enough faith for that? We look at, again, what he said in Matthew chapter 10 and verse 42, again, this idea of just giving a cup of cold water. I mean, that's nothing, right? I mean, just sharing water. When you go to a restaurant now, they'll charge you $2-ish, $50, $3 for a cup of tea that costs them 5 cents to make. But you can get water for free. As long as you get the right cup. I mean, it's nothing, right? They're not even charging. They charge for everything. Give somebody a nothing. Just giving somebody a cup of cold water when they need it. That's godly behavior. What about giving them something they can really, really use? That water of life. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 43, Jesus was doing some correcting. The Pharisees taught a certain way of life. And so he reminded those, this is what you've heard, but this is the way it needs to be. You've heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. And again, maybe she wasn't hated. Seems like she had a decent relationship with Naaman's wife to be able to just come out and speak what was on her mind. But she still was serving God by helping someone who may have been just using her. And as we looked at before with her, just being noticed, doing something that's good is not the objective. She made this suggestion of Elisha for the good of Naaman, his health, his life, but also, of course, bringing that to the glory of God, because this was God's man, the prophet of God. We see in Matthew chapter 6, verse 1, "Take heed that you do not do your charitable deeds before men to be seen by them. Otherwise you have no reward from your Father in heaven. Therefore, when you do a charitable deed, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory from men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. But when you do a charitable deed, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, that your charitable deed may be in secret. Your Father who sees in secret will himself reward you openly." We talked about this. We're discussing Matthew chapter 5 in the teen class, looking at that this morning. In Matthew chapter 5, of course, when you light your candle, we're the light of the world. We light. We don't, hide it under a bushel. We let that light shine, right, so that everyone can see it. And let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your God in heaven. That's the reason we do the good works. In Matthew chapter 6, don't do it for praise and glory and honor and that pat on the back, because if that's what you're looking for, that's as far as it's going to go. But if you do those good deeds for the glory of God, point it all back to Him. That's what He wants from us as we strive to live a life as He wants us to, as we are the light of the world. We live a sacrificial, holy, God-pleasing life. And when we do, remembering Romans 12:1, it's our reasonable service. That's what we're supposed to do. Not for attention, glory, and honor, but to point it right back to Him. And we see that, of course, in Luke 17, 7 through 10, living righteously, being obedient to God. When we've done everything that we're commanded to do, well, we've only done what we've been commanded to do. Are we living our lives as that sacrifice? Knowing what He wants us to do, and then not letting anything get in the way of us doing it. Because when we are going to be personally noticed, we want it to be on that day, Judgment Day. That's when we want to be noticed. That's when we want the attention to be put on us as our life is laid out in front of everyone, and we see God looking at our life, comparing it to the Scriptures, and saying, "You've done well. You've lived as you're supposed to live." And we see in Revelation 21, those that are going to be able to enter into heaven are those that have their name found in the Lamb's Book of Life. Those that have lived their life according to the standard, His Word, have a reservation waiting in heaven. Of course, that's just a blessing that's found in Christ. In Galatians 3:26 and 27, being obedient to His will, to the point of being baptized into Christ. That's where we find those spiritual blessings that He is offering to us. Eternal life in heaven. Tonight, we hope that you are living as you are supposed to. That you've obeyed the gospel in the past and are living that life as a Christian. But if you have not ever obeyed the gospel, why not tonight? If you have obeyed the gospel and have fallen away, and have let something get in the way of saying what you need to say, acting as you need to act, doing what God wants us to do. Why not have that removed? Get rid of sin, so that when it comes to that day, we don't have to be worried about something showing up that will keep our name out of that book of life. We'll have lived that life that is pleasing to Him, and we'll hear the invitation to come into heaven. Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of thy Lord. If we can help in any way, let's stand and sing.